Jejela Vishma continued the narrative, saying that those birds had been summoned by Jejela and responded in accordance with the principles of a religion that harmed no creature. Taladhara explained that all actions done without causing harm to others became beneficial both in this life and the next. He cautioned that acts involving injury to others destroyed faith, and when faith was lost, it led to ruin. Taladhara then spoke about the importance of faith in relation to Brahma, saying that it was the daughter of Surya, protector and giver of good birth. He emphasized that faith was superior to the merit born of Vedic recitations and meditation, an act vitiated by defective speech is saved by faith. He said, an act vitiated by defective mind is saved by faith. But when an act lacked faith, neither speech nor mind could save it. Bhishma continued, saying that the Supreme Lord had once told a group of deities that they had erred in their judgment regarding offerings to the gods. The Lord explained that the food of a liberal person was sanctified by faith, while the food of one void of faith was lost due to such lack of faith. Only one person in the world, he who was bereft of faith, was unfit to make offerings to the deities. Taladhara's words were like a balm to Jejela's soul. He understood that faith was a cleanser of sins, and with it one could cast off all their transgressions. Like a snake shedding its skin, the religion of abstention with faith was superior to all sacred things. Abstaining from all faults of behavior, one who betook themselves to faith became sanctified. Vishnu concluded by saying that every man has faith, but it is of three kinds, affected by sattva, rajas, and tamas. According to the kind of faith one had, they were named accordingly persons endued with goodness. And in the presence of the wise Vishma, King Vikikana shared an ancient tale born from his compassion for all living beings. It was a day like any other in the kingdom, with the air thick with the smell of sacrifice and death. A bull lay mangled on the ground, its body torn apart by cruel hands. While the kine nearby groaned in agony, the king watched as Brahmanas gathered around, their faces twisted in concentration as they assisted in the rituals. As he bore witness to this senseless slaughter, King Vikikana's heart swelled with sorrow and his voice trembled with emotion. Prosperity to all the kine in the world. He whispered his words of a blessing for the helpless animals. The monarch's eyes locked onto the Brahmanas, their faces now gleaming with an unsettling fervor. He spoke out against them, saying that only those who transgressed the limits of compassion and intelligence could justify the slaughter of innocent creatures. The king continued, those who seek to acquire fame through sacrifices and rituals are but skeptics, blinded by their own desires. His words cut deep into the hearts of his listeners, for they knew that he spoke from a place of truth. For in the midst of this chaos, King Vikikana stood firm, guided by the wisdom of the righteous Manu. He reminded them that harmlessness to all creatures was the highest of all duties. As Bhishma listened intently to the king's words, he knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty. The monarch spoke of a life of renunciation, one where one gave up domesticity and lived in harmony with nature. Only those who are mean, King Vikikana said, are urged by the desire for fruit. His words hung in the air like a challenge, a call to action for all who would listen. Bhishma's eyes narrowed as he pondered the king's words. He knew that the use of wine, fish, honey, and meat in sacrifices was not sanctioned by the Vedas. Instead, it arose from pride, error of judgment, and cupidity, the very vices that threatened to consume them. All the wise old warrior remembered the ancient wisdom that spoke of Vishnu's presence in every sacrifice and the importance of making offerings with agreeable pace. As the sun began to set on this fateful day, King Vikikana turned to his son Yudhishthira and asked a question that would haunt him for the rest of his days. How can one who is free from the desire to harm others succeed in keeping their body alive? The young prince looked puzzled, unsure of how to respond. Bhishma's voice cut through the silence like a sword, its edge sharp with wisdom. One should acquire merit and act in such a way that one's in the midst of a tumultuous era. Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandava brothers, sought guidance from his revered grandsire, Bhishma. The young prince was beset by a moral dilemma, one that would test the very fabric of his being. A wise and learned man, Chirakaran, son of Gautama Anhuras, had been commanded by his father to slay his own wife for an act of great fault, But Shirakaran's nature was such that he could not bring himself to commit such a heinous deed without first reflecting on the consequences. As Yudhishthira recounted the tale of Shirakaran, Bhishma began to weave a narrative that would unravel the complexities of filial duty and maternal love. Twice blessed is the man who reflects long before he acts. Bhishma declared, echoing the wisdom of the ancient sages, Shirakaran's predicament was one that many could relate to. His father's command had set him at odds with his own moral compass, which dictated that a son should obey his sire without question. Yet how could he slay his mother, who had given him life and nurtured him in her womb? The weight of this decision bore down upon Shirakaran like the crushing force of Mount Meru. As Bhishma spoke, Yudhishthira's eyes grew wide with understanding. He saw in Shirakaran a reflection of his own struggles, for he too had faced similar dilemmas in his own life. The young prince knew that he owed a debt of gratitude to both his father and mother, who had given him life and taught him the ways of the world. Bhishma continued, the sire is the giver of all articles of food, of instructions in the Vedas, and of all other knowledge regarding the world. The sire is religion. The sire is heaven. The sire is the highest penance. His words dripped with reverence, as if speaking of a deity rather than a mortal being. Yet Bhishma also acknowledged the sacred bond between mother and child. The mother is one's own body, he said, his voice filled with emotion. What rational man is there that would slay his mother, to whose care alone it is due that his own head did not lie on the street side like a dray gorgeous? Yudhishthira listened. He began to see the world in a new light. He realized that the relationship between parent and child was one of mutual obligation, with each party bound by duties of love and respect. The young prince knew that he could not shirk his responsibilities towards either his father or mother, for they had given him life and taught him the ways of the world. In this moment of clarity, Yudhishthira understood that true wisdom lay in embracing the complexities of life. Rather,
in the midst of a somber gathering, Yudhishthira, the righteous king, posed a profound question to his venerable grandsire, Bhishma. How can a king protect his subjects without causing harm to anyone? He asked, seeking guidance on the delicate balance between justice and compassion. Bhishma, with wisdom etched on his face, began to recount an ancient tale of Dyumitsana, a just king, and his conversation with Prince Satyavata. The prince had spoken words that would change the course of their discussion. Sometimes righteousness takes the form of iniquity, and iniquity assumes the form of righteousness. It is impossible for killing to be a righteous act. Dyumitsana, though initially unconvinced, was persuaded by Satyavata's words. He asked the prince to explain how he envisioned a society where individuals were not punished for their transgressions. Satyavata proposed that the three lower varnas, Kshatriyas, Vaisyas, and Sudras, be placed under the guidance of the Brahmanas, who would instill righteousness in them. Those who failed to follow the Brahmanas' teachings would be reported to the king, who would then inflict punishment without causing physical harm. As they spoke, Dyumitsana reflected on the changing times. He remembered a bygone era when men were truthful and governed themselves with ease, where harsh words were sufficient punishment for offenders. However, in their current age, the measure of wickedness had increased to such an extent that even the punishment of death was deemed necessary. Satyavata continued, if you cannot reform these rods without resorting to slaughter, then perform a sacrifice to exterminate them. He emphasized that good kings should not take pleasure in punishing their subjects, but rather strive to create an atmosphere of fearlessness and honesty. By doing so, they would set an example for others to follow. As the discussion unfolded, Dyumitsana shared his own thoughts on the subject. He believed that as long as the barriers of righteousness were maintained, society could function harmoniously. However, if those who transgressed these boundaries were not punished with death, the very fabric of society would begin to unravel. The conversation came full circle when Satyavata reminded Dyumitsana of their earlier discussion on the subject. He spoke of how good kings should first restrain themselves before attempting to govern others, and that punishment should be meted out only after careful consideration of the offense and its consequences. In this ancient tale, we find a timeless wisdom, a balance between justice and compassion, where punishment is not an end in itself, but rather a means to maintain social harmony. As Yudhishthira listened intently to Bhishma's recitation, he likely pondered the implications of their words for his own reign, seeking to rule with the same balance and wisdom that guided Dyumitsana.
The sun was setting over the kingdom of Hastinapura, casting a warm orange glow over the bustling streets. Yudhishthira the eldest of the Pandava brothers, sat at the feet of his wise and venerable grandfather Bhishma. The young prince had been pondering the complexities of Dharma, the ancient Hindu tradition that guided every aspect of life. Grandsire Yudhishthira said, "You have taught me about the path of yoga, which leads to the 6 well-known attributes. But tell me, what is the nature of the religion that leads to both enjoyment and emancipation among these 2 paths? Which one is superior?" Bhishma smiled, his eyes twinkling with wisdom. "Both courses of duty are highly blessed," he said. "Both are extremely difficult to accomplish, but both lead to high fruits. I shall presently discourse to you on the authoritativeness of both those courses of duty for dispelling your doubts about their true importance." Bhishma began to speak. A narrative unfolded like a tapestry, weaving together the threads of ancient wisdom. He told the story of Kapil, a sage of great renown who had once encountered a cow destined for slaughter at the hands of King Nahusha. Kapil's words were like a gentle breeze on a summer day. "Alas, ye Vedas," he exclaimed, "if the Vedas are deserving, where did these other duties come from, those that are fraught with harmlessness to all creatures?" Humorous, my wise Rishi, who had entered the form of the cow, replied, "Men devoted to penances and endued with intelligence regard the injunctions of the Vedas as the words of God himself. What can anybody say about the contents of the Vedas when they are the words of the Supreme Being?" Kapil's response was like a soothing balm. "I do not censure the Vedas. I do not wish to say anything in derogation of them. The different courses of duty laid down for the different modes of life all lead to the same end." As Bhishma continued his discourse, the narrative deepened, revealing the intricacies of sacrifice and its place within the Vedic tradition. Humorous spoke of the 17 limbs of sacrifice, clarified: buttermilk, curds, dung, skin, hair, horns, hoofs, and more, which together sustain the rituals. These things have been created for the performance of sacrifice. Humorous said, "It was thus that all men of ancient times set themselves to the performance of sacrifices, and those who perform sacrifices without attachment or expectation of reward do not injure any creature or bear hostility towards anything in this way." Bhishma's words wove a rich tapestry of wisdom, guiding Yudhishthira along the path of Dharma.
In a tranquil forest glade, Kapil stood tall, his eyes shining with wisdom as he addressed the assembly of sages gathered around him. "Behold," he said, "the fleeting nature of worldly desires, all that is attainable through acts, is but temporary and ephemeral. Yet those who have adopted self-restraint and tranquility through the path of knowledge have transcended the influence of opposites. They are free from the bondage of want and possess wisdom." Among the assembly was Sumarasmai, a sage renowned for his insight into the mysteries of life. He rose to counter Kapil's words. "If indeed this is the highest object of acquisition, then let us examine its feasibility without the domestic mode of life. No other path becomes possible. Just as all living creatures depend on their mothers for sustenance, so, too, do the 3 other modes of life rely on domesticity. The householder who leads the life of domesticity performs sacrifices and practices penances. Then it is through these acts that one can attain to emancipation." Kapil listened attentively to Sumarasmai's words, his expression thoughtful. He then responded, "If acts are obligatory, then there exist various rituals for the man of intelligence to perform. The Darsa, Purnamasa, Agnihotra, and Chaturmasya, in their performance lies eternal merit. Why then do those who have adopted the Sannyas mode of life abstain from all acts? It is through knowledge of Brahma that they succeed in paying off the debts to the gods." Rishis and Pitrasis. The discussion continued. Kapil emphasized the importance of self-control. One should strive to keep one's doors under control. The organ of speech, the stomach, and the organ of pleasure. One should not gamble with this, nor appropriate what belongs to another. One should not assist at the sacrifice of a person of ignoble birth, nor give way to wrath and smite another with hands or feet. Sumarasmai nodded in agreement, his eyes shining with understanding. By conducting oneself in this manner, one will have one's organ of speech well restrained. One should not abstain entirely from food, nor eat too much. One should give up covetousness and seek the companionship of the good. By doing so, one succeeds in properly controlling the door represented by one's stomach. The assembly of sages sat in contemplative silence For a moment absorbing the wisdom imparted by Kapila and Simarasmai, it was clear that they had delved into the very heart of existence, exploring the relationship between axe knowledge and self-control. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the forest glade, the sages dispersed, each carrying with them a deeper understanding of the mysteries of life. The stars began to. In the sacred tradition of ancient India, Kapila, a revered sage, imparted profound wisdom to his disciples. He began by affirming the authority of the Vedas, which were considered the ultimate guide for all seekers of truth. According to Kapila, these scriptures were never disregarded or disrespected by anyone. Kapila then elaborated on the concept of Brahma, the divine principle that underlies all existence. He explained that there are two aspects of Brahma, the one represented by sound and the other the supreme, which is intangible and beyond human comprehension. Kapila declared that those who had achieved a deep understanding of the first aspect could eventually attain to the second. He went on to describe the process of spiritual growth, emphasizing the importance of purification through Vedic mantras. As the individual body was cleansed of its impurities, it became fit to receive knowledge of Brahma. Kapila stressed that the ultimate reward for righteous actions was not material wealth or worldly success, but rather the attainment of a pure heart. The sage then spoke of those who had lived in the past, exemplifying the highest ideals of human conduct. These individuals were characterized by their selflessness, compassion, and detachment from worldly desires. They performed their duties with conviction, making gifts to deserving persons as an expression of gratitude for the blessings they received. Kapila described these men as being endowed with perfect sincerity, contentment, and certainty of knowledge. Their lives shone like beacons, illuminating the path for others to follow. These individuals were not only revered, but also considered manifestations of the divine principle itself. As Kapila continued to expound on his teachings, he explained that the ultimate goal was to transcend all earthly desires and attain a state of unity with Brahma. He described the process of spiritual growth as one of gradual purification, where the individual's actions and thoughts become more refined until they eventually merge into the infinite. Expansive sage then spoke of four modes of life: the domestic forest, sannyasa, and brahmacharya. Each of these paths, when pursued with dedication and sincerity, could lead to a state of unity with Brahma. Kapila emphasized that those who had reached this state were no longer bound by the laws of karma, as their actions had been purified through their devotion to the divine principle. In conclusion, Kapila's teachings offered a profound vision of human potential, where individuals could transcend their limitations and become one with the infinite. He imparted timeless wisdom, guiding his disciples on a journey towards spiritual growth, self-realization, and ultimate liberation.
In the midst of a serene forest, Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandava brothers, sat at the feet of his venerable grandfather Bhishma with curiosity in his eyes. He asked, "Grandsire, I have heard that the Vedas speak of three great pursuits: religion, profit, and pleasure. Which one is considered superior?" Bhishma's eyes sparkled as he began to recount an ancient tale from a bygone era. He spoke of Kundera, a mighty cloud who dwelled in close proximity to the gods of Brahmana, poor, but driven by his desire for virtue had sought out Kundera's favor. The Brahmana had attempted to acquire wealth through worship and penance, but ultimately failed. As he pondered his next move, the Brahmana spotted Kundera standing before him, his heart filled with devotion. He exclaimed, "This one will surely bestow prosperity upon me." With great reverence, the Brahmana offered Kundera worship using the finest dubas, perfumes, and garlands of flowers. Kundera was pleased by the Brahmana's devotion and spoke words of wisdom. He told the Brahmana that ingratitude is a sin with no expiation, while expectation breeds iniquity. Eye springs from envy, and cupidity arises from deceit. The cloud then vanished, leaving the Brahmana to ponder his words. As night fell, the Brahmana lay on a bed of kusa, grass infused with Kundera's energy. He beheld a dream vision where he saw Manipura, a high-souled deity, granting boons to those who had earned them through good deeds. The gods bestowed kingdoms and riches upon men, while taking them away when they fell from virtue. Kundera still in the form of a cloud, approached Manavhadra and requested a boon for his devoted worshipper. He asked not for wealth or material possessions, but rather that the Brahmana be virtuous. Manavhadra granted this wish, saying that the fruits of virtue would bring sovereignty and happiness. The Brahmana then beheld scattered around him many delicate fabrics of cloth, unimpressed by their value. He felt a growing distaste for the world. He realized that if even someone as devoted to virtue as himself could not appreciate the good deeds he had done, who else would? The Brahmana decided to renounce the world and enter the woods to lead a life of righteousness. Under the guidance of Kandadhara's blessing, the Brahmana began his journey, subsisting on fruits and roots. Gradually, he gave up these sustenance and took to living on leaves. Then water alone. His strength never wavered, and after many years, he acquired spiritual vision. With this newfound insight, he beheld the true nature of reality as Kandadhara appeared before him once more.
In the heart of a kingdom renowned for its virtue, there lived a Brahmana named Satya. He was a devoted man, deeply committed to his tenances and sacrifices in honor of Vishnu. His food consisted of Simeka, Suryaparna, and Savarkala, bitter herbs that were unpleasant to the taste. Yet he had grown accustomed to them through his ascetic practices. Satya's wife, Pushkaradharani, was a woman of great virtue and compassion. She had emaciated herself through her observance of austere vows, but despite her husband's addiction to cruel sacrifices, she remained steadfast in her devotion. When summoned to join Satya for the performance of a sacrifice, she reluctantly agreed, fearing his wrath. As they prepared for the ritual, a neighbor of theirs, Parnada from Sukra's line, appeared before them in the form of a deer. He spoke to Satya in articulate speech, cautioning him against proceeding with the sacrifice unless it was performed flawlessly, complete with all necessary mantras and rituals. The deer begged Satya to slay and cut him into pieces for use as libations on their sacrificial fire. However, when the presiding goddess of the solar disk, Savatri, appeared in her embodied form, she insisted that Satya carry out his desire. But Satya refused, unwilling to harm the deer who lived nearby. The goddess then withdrew from the sacrifice, citing a desire to observe the nether world and avoid any defects in the ritual. Undeterred, Parnada the deer returned, begging Satya once more to slaughter him. This time he promised that by doing so he would attain a righteous end and grant Satya spiritual vision. As they conversed, Dharma himself revealed his presence as the deer, guiding Satya towards salvation. Dharma counseled Satya, saying that the ordinances of sacrifice did not allow for the harming of living creatures. The Brahmana's mind had grown clouded by the prospect of slaughter, and as a result his penances diminished greatly. Dharma then assumed his true form and assisted Satya in performing a new sacrifice, one free from cruelty. Through this renewed commitment to virtue, Satya eventually attained the state of mind shared by his wife, Pushkaradharani. Abstention from injury was revealed as the complete and rewarding path, while the religion of cruelty, though leading to heaven, had its own limitations. In the end, Dharma declared that the true path of truth, the essence of Brahma's teachings, was one of compassion and non-violence. As this tale came to a close, it became clear that even in the pursuit of spiritual growth, there existed a fine line between devotion and cruelty. Satya's journey served as a poignant reminder of the importance of living in harmony with nature and respecting all life, lest we fall prey to our own desires. And in the midst of a grand assembly, King Yudhishthira posed the profound question to Bhishma, the venerable sage and warrior: by what means doth a man become sinful? He asked, seeking guidance on the path to righteousness. Bhishma, with his piercing gaze and wise countenance, began to unravel the mysteries of human nature. He explained that it all begins with perception. When one encounters the 5 objects of sense, form, taste, and sound, and touch, desire stirs within, and attachment arises as we strive to acquire what pleases us and avoid what displeases us. Our desires intensify, so do our attachments and aversions. The mind becomes clouded by greed, error, and hypocrisy. We pretend to act virtuously, but in reality we seek only to accumulate wealth and possessions. Yudhishthira listened intently as Bhishma described how this attachment to worldly things can lead to sin. Note the three kinds of sins. Bhishma said, his voice steady and firm, we think, speak, and act with sinful intentions despite the warnings of well-wishers and wise men. As one succumbs to these vices, even those who share similar inclinations may become friends, while those who are virtuous will mark our wickedness. But Bhishma did not leave Yudhishthira in despair. He revealed a contrasting path, that of righteousness. A righteous person seeks the good of others, and in doing so achieves their own well-being by cultivating virtues that benefit all. They attain a state of great happiness. Bhishma continued to guide Yudhishthira on this noble path. He who is wise, skilled in discerning what is true happiness and sorrow, and reverent towards the good, will progress on the road to virtue. As one develops virtuous habits and surrounds themselves with like-minded individuals, their mind becomes enamored with righteousness. Yudhishthira listened attentively as Bhishma described how a righteous person desires wealth only when acquired through righteous means. They cultivate merit in all that they do, watering the roots of virtues that bring true happiness. In this way one acquires good friends, wealth, and children, enjoying joy both in this life and the next. Bhishma's words carried Yudhishthira to a deeper understanding. He grasped the significance of virtue as the fruit of righteousness, a mastery over worldly desires that brings lasting fulfillment. Yet Bhishma cautioned, even with this realization one must not become complacent in their achievements. Instead, they should strive for renunciation, guided by the eye of knowledge. Yudhishthira's understanding deepened. He saw how attachment to worldly pleasures can lead to suffering. He learned that true freedom comes from freeing oneself from desire, yet this does not mean abandoning. The sun was setting over the kingdom, casting a warm orange glow over the bustling streets. Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandavas, sat at the feet of his wise grandfather Bhishma, seeking guidance on the path to spiritual liberation. Grandsired Yudhishthira said, "You have spoken of the means by which one can achieve emancipation. I desire to hear more about these methods." Bhishma smiled, pleased with Yudhishthira's eagerness for knowledge. "My child," he began, "the path to liberation is not a straightforward one. It requires great discipline and self-control. One must first cultivate the quality of sattva, which is the essence of purity and wisdom." Bhishma paused, collecting his thoughts before continuing. "One should also practice forgiveness, abandoning all purposes and desires. By conquering sleep and cultivating heedfulness, one can keep fear at bay, and through contemplation of the soul one can conquer even breath itself." Yudhishthira listened intently, his eyes shining with understanding. Bhishma went on to explain that desire, aversion, and lust must be dispelled by patience, while error, ignorance, and doubt are overcome by study of truth. The pursuit of knowledge is essential for avoiding insouciance and the inquiry into things of no interest. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Bhishma's words painted a vivid picture in Yudhishthira's mind. He saw himself practicing benevolence, conquering iniquity, and acquiring virtue by regarding all creatures with compassion. The young prince felt his heart swell with a sense of purpose, knowing that he must strive to cultivate these qualities within himself. Bhishma's words continued to flow like a river, guiding Yudhishthira through the complexities of spiritual growth. The man of intelligence should abandon affection, Bhishma said, remembering that everything in this world is transitory. He should subdue hunger by practicing yoga and keep off all ideas of self-importance by cultivating contentment. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Yudhishthira felt a sense of peace settle within him. He knew that he had much work to do, but with Bhishma's guidance he was confident that he could overcome any obstacle on his path to liberation. Just then Bhishma told the story of Narada and Asita, two wise sages who had engaged in a profound discussion about the nature of creation. Narada asked Devala about the origin and destruction of all creatures, seeking to understand the mysteries of the universe. Devala smiled, his eyes twinkling with wisdom. "The Supreme Soul creates all creatures from the 5 great essences," he explained. "These are water, space, earth, wind."
As the sun set over the kingdom of Hastinapura, Yudhishthira's eyes fell upon his companions. The weight of their actions hung heavy in the air like a dark cloud threatening to burst forth at any moment. His voice trembled as he spoke, cruel and sinful, that we are, alas, we have slain brothers and sires and grandsons and kinsmen and friends and sons. How, grandsire, shall we dispel this thirst for wealth? Alas, through that thirst we have perpetrated many sinful deeds. Bhishma's wise eyes gazed upon his grandson with compassion and understanding. He knew the pain of guilt that Yudhishthira felt, a burden that weighed heavily on their collective conscience in this connection. Bhishma began his sight of the old narrative of what was said by the ruler of the Vaidhyas unto the inquiring Mandadya, saying, shifted to the kingdom of Mithala, where the wise and just ruler of the Vaidhyas sat in contemplative silence. His words dripped with wisdom as he spoke to Mandavya. I have nothing in this world, yet I live in great happiness. If the whole of Mithala were to burn in a conflagration, nothing of mine would be burnt down. He paused, his eyes twinkling with insight. Tangible possessions, however valuable, are a source of sorrow to men of knowledge, while possessions of even little value fascinate the foolish Mandavya. Listen intently, his heart drinking in the wisdom of the ruler's words. As he spoke, the wise man continued, whatever happiness exists here derivable from the gratification of desire, and whatever heavenly happiness exists of high value, do not come up to even a 16th part of the felicity that attends the total disappearance of desire. His voice rose with conviction as the horns of a cow grow with the growth of the cow itself. After the same manner, the thirst for wealth increases with increasing acquisitions of wealth. Yudhishthira's eyes locked onto Bhishma's as if seeking guidance and reassurance. The old warrior's words dripped with wisdom. Whatever the object for which one feels an attachment, that object becomes a source of pain. When it is lost, one should not cherish desire. Attachment to desire leads to sorrow. He paused, his voice filled with empathy. When wealth has been acquired, one should apply it to purposes of virtue. One should even then give up desire. As the wise words washed over them, Yudhishthira's companions felt a weight lift from their shoulders. The darkness that had threatened to consume them began to recede like the ebbing tide, revealing a tranquil shore. Bhishma continued, the man of knowledge always looks upon other creatures even as he looks upon himself, having cleansed his. The sun had just begun to set on the kingdom of Hastinapura, casting a warm orange glow over the bustling streets. Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandava brothers, sat in deep contemplation with his grandfather Bhishma by his side. The young prince's eyes were filled with concern and uncertainty as he asked his venerable grandfather, time, which is fraught with terror for all creatures, is running its course. What is that source of good after which one should strive? Tell me. This, O grandsire. Bhishma's eyes twinkled with wisdom as he began to recount an ancient tale. In a bygone era, there lived a sage who was devoted solely to the study of the Vedas. He had a son named Medhavan who was renowned for his intelligence and curiosity. One day Medhavan approached his father with a question that would change their lives forever. The young Medhavan looked at his father with an air of determination. Father, knowing that the period of existence allotted to men runs fast away, what should a man of intelligence do? Tell me truly and in proper order, so that I may set myself to the acquisition of virtue. The sage's eyes widened as he pondered his son's words, and then began to speak with conviction. Heaven, my child, having studied the Vedas all your life and observing the duties of Brahmacharya, you should then desire offspring for the sake of rescuing our ancestors. Having established one's fire and performing the sacrifices ordained by the gods, one should then retire into the woods and live as a forest recluse, casting off everything and calmly waiting for dissolution. But Medhavan was not convinced, of father, when the world is thus assailed and besieged on all sides, and when such irresistible forces are falling in every direction, how can you speak so calmly? Bhishma's eyes sparkled with amusement as he watched his grandson's exchange with the sage. How is the world assailed? By what is it besieged? What are those irresistible bolts that are falling on every side? Dost thou frighten me with thy words? Medhavan's voice grew more urgent. The world is assailed by death. It is besieged by decrepitude. Days and nights are continually falling like bolts. Why do you not take heed of these? The sage looked taken aback by his son's words, but then began to speak with a newfound sense of urgency. Medhavan, my child, when I know that death does not wait for any one in particular, but snatches all away suddenly and without notice, how can I possibly wait, thus enveloped in ignorance and heedlessly attending to my concerns, when as each night passes away, the period of everyone's life wears away with it, when indeed one's position is similar to that of a fish in shallow, in the midst of a gran assembly, Yudhishthira, the righteous king, posed a profound question to Bhishma. The venerable sage, what behavior must a man adopt? He asked, what acts should he perform, what kind of knowledge should he acquire, and to what should he be devoted in order to attain the unchangeable realm of Brahma, which transcends the flux of Prakriti. Vishwa's eyes sparkled with wisdom as he began to recount the path to liberation. A man must renounce worldly attachments, he said, and live a life of frugality, mastering his senses and desires. He should retire from his home regarding gain and loss as equal, and restrain himself from injuring any creature. As Bhishma spoke, his words wove a tapestry of detachment and compassion. One should not disparage another with word or thought, he cautioned, nor speak evil of anyone in their presence or absence. He should abstain from harming any living being, conducting himself according to the natural order of the sun. Yudhishthira listened intently as Bhishma continued his discourse. When bespattered by others with filth, one should remain unmoved, refraining from addressing them in disagreeable speech. One must be compassionate, forgiving, and fearless, free from self-aggrandizement. A sage then outlined the practical aspects of this path. A sannyas should seek his alms in a household where the smoke has ceased to rise from the hearth, when the husking rod is silent, or when all the inmates have finished their meals. He should content himself with only what is necessary for sustenance, never coveting more than he needs. Bhishma's words dripped like honey as he spoke of the sannyasin's life. He should not find fault with food placed before him, nor applaud its merits. He should seek a bed, and seek remove from human haunts, and reside in deserted houses, forests, or caves, without revealing his true nature to others. As Bhishma concluded his teachings, Yudhishthira's eyes shone with understanding. The sage Harita, who had also espoused this path, declared that a life of renunciation was the means for attaining emancipation. He who sets forth from his home, he said, having assured all creatures of his perfect harmlessness, shall attain many bright regions of felicity, eternal and unending. Thus Bhishma's words echoed through the assembly, illuminating the path to liberation for those willing to listen. In the midst of their luxurious life, Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandava princes, gazed out at his family and friends with a sense of despair. We are considered fortunate, he said to his grandfather Bhishma, but in truth we are among the wretched. Despite being born into royalty, despite being honored by all, our lives have been marked by sorrow. Alas, when will we adopt the life of renunciation that frees us from this suffering? Bhishma, wise and venerable, listened attentively to Yudhishthira's words. Everything in life has its limits, he said gently. Even rebirth has an end. You think our affluence is a fault. No, my child, it is not. You are conversant with virtue and have the readiness to attain emancipation. It is certain that you will overcome your sorrow in time. Yudhishthira's words had struck a chord within Bhishma, for he knew the truth of his grandson's words. The jiva, or soul, was not the author of its own merits and demerits, but was enveloped by the darkness of ignorance born from its actions, like the wind carrying. Thus the jiva assumed a hue, becoming stained and changeless. They spoke. Bhishma recalled an ancient tale, one that which life on their conversation. He told Yudhishthira about Vritra, a deity who had once been a powerful ruler, but was now stripped of his sovereignty. Yet despite his loss, Vritra had transcended sorrow, understanding the fleeting nature of life and the inevitability of rebirth. Vritra's story was one of wisdom and self-awareness. He had realized that creatures come and go, bound by their actions to repeat cycles of birth and death. I have seen this truth, Vritra said to his preceptor Usinus. All acquisitions correspond with one's acts. Creatures take birth as men or animals or gods, and they meet with happiness and misery according to their deeds. Usinus was taken aback by Vritra's words, for he had never heard his pupil speak in such a manner before. But Vritra continued sharing his own experiences of undergoing severe penances, swelling up with energy and achieving great prosperity, only to lose it again through his own actions. Despite his fall from power, Vritra remained unattached, relying on his fortitude to guide him. He had beheld the illustrious Narayana in battle, and in that moment he had gained a remnant of the rewards for his penance. It was this unexhausted reward that drew Vritra to ask Usinus about the fruits of action. What order of men has established high Brahma prosperity? Vritra asked. In a realm beyond mortal comprehension, Usinus, a sage of great renown, stood in reverence before the majesty of Vishnu. With humility and awe he began to speak of the divine being's infinite greatness. I bow to that illustrious and puissant being who holds This earth with the firmament in his arms Usinus declared as they conversed a wise sage named Sanacumera, arrived his presence a beacon of light in the darkness. The prince of Azurus, Danavus, and Usinus welcomed him warmly, acknowledging his great wisdom. Sanacumera sat upon a costly seat, surrounded by the reverend assembly. Usinus requested that Sanacumera share with the chief of the Danavus the preeminent greatness of Vishu. The sage's words poured forth like a river filled with profound wisdom and significance. Listen, O Daitya. He began the entire universe, rests on Vishnu. He is the creator, sustainer, and destroyer of all beings in the cycle of time. He withdraws all things and casts them forth. Ayus and Akumara's discourse revealed the intricate web of creation where Vishnu dwelled as both mutable and immutable. His essence was multifaceted with 11 modifications that govern the universe. The sage described how Vishnu's body was comprised of various attributes. His feet were the earth, his head was the heaven, and his arms were the horizon. As Sanacumera spoke, he revealed the mysteries of the cosmos, where the planets, stars, and constellations emerged from Vishnu's radiance. The sage explained that the 3 attributes, Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva, were an integral part of Vishnu's nature. He was the ultimate goal of all pious acts, the reward for those who sought to understand him. Sanacumera continued his discourse describing how creatures attain different states of mind based on their actions. He spoke of the unity that existed within all living beings, and how true knowledge revealed this interconnectedness. The Veda that is in the soul regards the unity of various creatures. He said, when a living creature realizes this unity, he attains to Brahma. Sanacumera's words unfolded like a tapestry. He shared with the assembly the secrets of time and creation. He explained how one kalpa, a period of creation, lasted for thousands of millions of years. The sage compared the drying up of lakes to the passing of time, illustrating the immense span of a single creation. In his final revelation, Sanacumera spoke of the 6 colors that emerged from the mixtures of Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva. He explained how these colors represented different states of being, with white being the most desirable due to its freedom from attachment and aversion. Jiva, O Daitya, he said, in the realm of ancient mythology a tale of mighty deeds and divine intervention unfolded. Yudhishthir, the wise and inquisitive prince, sought to understand the story of Vritra, the azure of immeasurable energy and devotion to Vishnu. Bhishma, the venerable grandsire, was his guide and narrator. Bhishma began by describing the awe-inspiring form of Vritra, a colossal being 500 yojanas in height and 300 yojanas in circumference. As Indra, the chief of the deities, beheld this formidable foe, he felt palsy in his lower extremities and was struck with fear. The battle between the gods and the Asuras had commenced, filling the welkin with terror. The combat raged on, with Vritra employing his powers of illusion to confound Indra and the celestial forces. Vasishta, the sage, intervened, restoring Indra to consciousness by invoking the sacred Samanas. The god's strength was revitalized, but he remained vulnerable to Vritra's illusions. Sriyasvati, the son of Aindirus, and other revered rishis, witnessing the prowess of Vritra, sought the aid of Mahadeva, the lord of the universe. They urged him to destroy the great Asura, and his energy assumed the form of a fire fever that penetrated Vritra's body. Vishnu, the divine protector of the universe, entered the thunderbolt of Indra, empowering it with his own essence. The rishis, led by Vasishta and Vryaspati, implored Indra to slay Vritra without delay. Mahaswara, the 3-eyed lord, granted his energy to Indra, saying, aided by Yuka, do the slay him, O chief of the deities, with the blessings of Mahadeva and Vishnu. Indra, now empowered, declared, before the eyes, O foremost of gods, I shall through thy grace slay with my thunderbolt this invincible son of Ditai, the great Azure. Vritra was thus overcome by the favor born of Mahadeva's energies. The deities and rishis rejoiced at the prospect of victory. Drums, kents, and kettle drums began to resound, filling the air with joyous music. Suddenly the Azuras were afflicted with the loss of memory, their powers of illusion vanishing. The rishis and deities urged Indra to hasten his attack, and the mighty god, now transformed by divine power, assumed a form that inspired awe in all who beheld it. Thus
The tale of Vritra's downfall was told, a testament to the might of the gods and the power of devotion. Yudhishthir's curiosity had been satisfied, but the story remained.
In a distant era, Vritra, a mighty azure, lay afflicted by a fever born from the divine energy of Mahedeva. His body began to tremble, his breath grew thick and labored, and flames danced on his lips. The air around him was filled with the cries of vultures, cranes, and Kanakas as they wheeled about his head. Indra, the king of the gods, armed with his thunderbolt, gazed upon Vritra's form as the azure yawned in agony. Indra struck him down with a bolt of lightning that resembled the fiery destruction of the cosmos. At the end of an Aegean, gods rejoiced as Vritra fell, but their jubilation was short-lived. A terrible being emerged from the slain Asure's body. Brahmanicide, a manifestation of the sin of killing a Brahmin. Her form was dreadful to behold, dark, tawny, and hideous, with disheveled hair and eyes that inspired terror, clad in rags and adorned with a garland of skulls. She sought out Indra. Now freed from Vritra's body, Brahmanicide seized the chief of the gods, and he was consumed by fear. His energies waned as she clung to him, refusing to let go despite his efforts to shake her off. Indra was powerless against her grasp. The god finally presented himself before the grandsire Brahman. Seeking relief from this dreadful affliction, Brahman listened to Indra's plight and reflected on the means of freeing him from Brahmanicide's clutches. He spoke in a gentle voice, as if soothing a troubled child. "O amiable one, let the chief of the celestials be freed from thee. Tell me what I shall do for thee. What wish of thine shall I accomplish?" Brahmanicide replied that her wishes were already fulfilled, and she only sought an abode to dwell in. The grandsire granted her request, but also devised a plan to free Indra from her grasp. He recalled the mighty Agni, the devourer of oblations, and instructed him to take a portion of Brahmanicide's sin upon himself. Agni accepted this command, and was tasked with taking a fourth part of the sin into his being. As Agni did so, he discovered that the sin would enter the person who offered him as an oblation. When he appeared in his blazing form, the grandsire then summoned the trees, herbs, and grasses to take upon themselves another portion of Brahmanicide's sin addressed by the Creator. They agreed to bear this burden, but asked for a means of their own rescue. A grandsire revealed that the sin would possess the man who, through stupefaction of judgment, cut or tore any of them during the sacred Parva days, the trees and herbs. In the presence of Yudhishthira, Bhishma began to recount the origin of fever. The grandsire's eyes sparkled with wisdom as he spoke of a time long past, when Mahedeva, the lord of all creatures, resided on the summit of Meru. This sacred peak was adorned with jewels and gems, and its grandeur was matched only by the splendor of the divine beings who dwelled there, celestial rishis, gods and goddesses, including Yuma, the daughter of the king of mountains, would often pay homage to Mahedeva on this sacred site. The air was filled with the sweet scent of perfumes, and the trees bloomed with flowers of every season. Vidyateras, Siddhas, ascetics, and even ghostly beings and Rakshasas would gather there to worship the Lordess. Bhishma continued his tale. He spoke of Prajapati Daksha's grand sacrifice on the Himavat mountain. The deities, led by Sakra, had assembled to participate in the ceremony, but Mahedeva chose not to attend. Yuma, filled with curiosity and concern, asked her divine spouse why he did not join the other gods. Mahedeva explained that according to an ancient arrangement, no share of sacrificial offerings was assigned to him. This caused Yuma great distress, and she implored Mahedeva to wipe away the shame. Moved by his wife's words, Mahedeva decided to put an end to Daksha's sacrifice. With a mighty roar, Mahedeva descended upon the Himavat, accompanied by his terrible followers. They destroyed the sacrifice, and in the chaos that ensued, a deer-like creature emerged from the flames of the ruined altar. This creature fled through the skies, pursued by Mahedeva with bow and arrows. Mahedeva's wrath reached its peak. A single drop of sweat fell to the earth, giving rise to a blazing fire. From this fire emerged a being of immense energy with blood-red eyes, a green bird, and hair like a hawk's or owl's. This being quickly consumed the sacrifice and body form, and then rushed towards the deities, and rishis, the gods, fled in terror as the earth trembled beneath their feet. Brahman, the grandsire, appeared to Mahedeva and implored him to withdraw his wrath. He declared that the deities would henceforth yield a share of the sacrificial offerings to Mahedeva. The being born from Mahedeva's sweat was then instructed by Brahman to wander among creatures. As Phoebus, the grandsire, finished speaking, he appointed a share of the sacrifice for Mahedeva, and the divine Lord's wrath began to subside. With this tale, Bhishma concluded his account of the origin of fever, leaving Yudhishthira in awe of the grandeur. In the sacred region inhabited by rishis and siddhas where the Ganges issued out of the mountains, Daksha, a virtuous man and progenitor of creatures, had made arrangements to perform a grand sacrifice on the breast of him at the gods Danavasgand, Harvest, Pittacus, snakes, Rakshasas, and many other living creatures from the four orders were invited to participate in the ritual. However, amidst the preparations, Rishi Dadichai became filled with grief and wrath upon beholding that Rudra was not being adored. Dadichai's words of warning fell on deaf ears as the gods and rishis continued with their preparations. He alone voiced his concerns about worshipping one who should not be worshipped and refusing to worship him who should be. Dadichai declared the protector of all creatures, the creator of the universe, the lord of all, the puissant master, the taker of sacrificial offerings will soon come to this sacrifice, and you all shall see him. Daksha, however, remained unconvinced, stating that he knew many Rudras, but not Mahasura. Dadichai replied that his counsel was ignored, and the proposed sacrifice would certainly be overtaken by destruction. Meanwhile, Daksha intended to make an offering unto Vishnu, who was beyond comparison. The preparations continued. Yuma, seated with her lord Mahadeva on the summit of Kailasa, spoke words of concern. She asked what gifts, vows, or penances she should perform to enable her illustrious husband to obtain a share of the offerings and sacrifices. Mahadeva, with a joyous countenance, replied that only the sinful and those bereft of contemplation did not understand him. He revealed that he was the one who was worshipped through chants, praises, and performances of sacrifices. Mahadeva then created the terrible being from his mouth, known as Vairavadra, to destroy the sacrifice of Daksha. This being was a living embodiment of Mahadeva's wrath with immeasurable might, energy, and courage. He was accompanied by hundreds and thousands of spirit chiefs known as Ramas, who rushed to the site of the sacrifice, filled with the desire to destroy Edis. The noise of their arrival reached the heavens. The denizens of heaven were filled with fear. The mountains themselves seemed to tremble at the sound of their dreadful cries and shrieks. The stage was set for a catastrophic confrontation between the forces of destruction and the gods who had assembled for the sacrifice. The sun had just begun to set on the rolling hills of Kurukshetra, casting a warm orange glow over the vast expanse of land. Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandava brothers, sat in rapt attention as he listened to Vishnu's words. The venerable warrior had been asked by Yudhishthira to recount the names by which Daksha, the creator of all living beings, adored the great deity. Vishnu's eyes sparkled with a deep reverence as he began to speak. "Hear, O Bharata," he said, his voice low and soothing. "The names, both secret and proclaimed, are those of that god of gods, that deity of extraordinary feats, the ascetic of secret vows." Yudhishthira's curiosity was piqued, and he leaned forward, eager to hear the list of names. Daksha, the creator, began to speak in a voice filled with devotion. "I bow to thee, O Lord of all the gods." Daksha said, his words pouring out like a river. "Thou art the destroyer of the forces of the Asurus. Thou art the paralyzer of the strength of the celestial chief himself. Thou art adored by both gods and Danavas." Daksha continued to speak. He described the Lord in vivid terms. He spoke of the thousand-eyed deity, fierce-eyed and three-eyed, with hands and feet extending in all directions, his eyes and head turned on all sides. His ears were everywhere in the universe, and he was himself present everywhere. Daksha's words grew more elaborate as he continued to describe the Lord. "Thou art shaft-eared, thou art large-eared, and thou art pock-eared." He said, "Thou art the receptacle of the unseen." He spoke of the Lord's 100 stomachs, his 100 revolutions, and his 100 tummas. The list of names went on, and on each one a testament to the boundless nature of the deity. Daksha spoke of the Lord as the Hotrai in sacrifices, as the mantras uttered in sacrifices, and as the owner of white flags and standards. He described him as the navel of the universe, as both cause and effect in the form of the 5 primal elements. As Yudhishthira listened to Daksha's words, he felt his heart filled with wonder and awe. The list of names seemed endless, each one a glimpse into the infinite nature of the deity. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Daksha finished speaking. Yudhishthira sat in silence for a moment, taking it all, and then with a deep bow he spoke his final words. "I bow to thee, O Lord." Yudhishthira said, his voice filled with reverence, "Thou art the one and only truth. Thou art the sun had just begun to rise over the vast expanse of the Bharata kingdom, casting a warm glow over the landscape.
Yudhishthira. The wise and just king sat in deep contemplation with his revered grandsire Bhishma. The air was filled with an expectant silence as Yudhishthira asked the question that had been weighing on his mind. Grandsire, tell me, what is Adhyatma, and from where does it arise? Bhishma's eyes sparkled with wisdom as he began to explain the mysteries of Adhyatma. Aided by the sense of Adhyatma, he said, one may know everything. It is superior to all things, and I shall do my best to explain its secrets to you. He took a deep breath, and his words flowed like a river. The five great essences, earth, wind, space, water, and light, form the foundation of all existence. Bhishma said, these are the causes of the origin and destruction of all creatures. The bodies of living beings, both supple and gross, are the result of the combination of these five virtues. He paused, allowing Yudhishthira to absorb the profundity of his words. The virtues of these five essences repeatedly start into existence and merge into the original cause of all things. The Supreme Soul, Bhishma continued, from these five primal essences are created all creatures, and into those five great elements all creatures resolve themselves repeatedly, like the infinite waves of the Ocean, rising from the Ocean and subsiding into that which causes them. As Bhishma spoke, Yudhishthira's eyes grew wide with wonder. He saw the intricate web of existence unfolding before him. How sound arose from space, and all dense matter was an attribute of earth. How life sprang from wind, taste from water, and form from light. Bhishma explained further that when destruction came, the infinite diversity of creatures resolved themselves into those five great essences, and when creation began, they sprang forth. He knew the Creator placed in all creatures the same five great essences in proportions. He thought proper. Yudhishthira's mind was reeling with the complexity of it all, but Bhishma's words were like a gentle breeze, soothing and calming his doubts. The understanding dwells within Jiva, Bhishma said, existing in three states, sometimes obtaining joy, sometimes indulging in grief, and sometimes existing in a state that is neither pleasure nor pain. As the sun reached its zenith, Yudhishthira's understanding was illuminated by Bhishma's teachings. He saw how the understanding created attributes, while the soul remained an inactive witness of everything. The union between the two was eternal, and the indwelling understanding apprehended all things through the senses.
In the midst of war and bloodshed, Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandavas, sought wisdom from his grandfather Bhishma on how to prevent sorrow and death. He asked, living creatures always stand in fear of sorrow and death. Tell me, O grandsire, how the occurrence of these two may be prevented. Bhishma replied, in this connection, O Bharata, is cited the old narrative of the discourse between Narada and Samina. Narada, a celestial sage, asked Samina, you salute your superiors by prostrating yourself on the ground till your chest comes into contact with the ground. You seem to be imaged in crossing the river of life with your hands. You seem to be always free from sorrow and exceedingly cheerful. I do not see that you have the least anxiety. Samina smiled, his eyes twinkling with wisdom. O giver of honors, I know the truth about the past, the present, and the future. Hence, I never become cheerless. I know also what the beginning of acts is in this world, what the accession of their fruits, and how varied by those fruits. He paused, serving Narada with a gentle gaze. Behold the illiterate, the destitute, the prosperous. O Narada, the blind, idiots, and madmen, and ourselves also all live. These live by virtue of their acts of past lives. Narada's curiosity was piqued. He asked Samina to explain further. Samina continued, the very deities who exist freed from diseases exist in that state by virtue of their past acts. The strong and the weak all live by virtue of past acts. It is fitting, therefore, that you should hold us in esteem. He chuckled softly. When we, O Narada, do not give way to grief, what can the practice of the duties or the observance of religious acts do to us? Narada listened intently as Samina revealed the secrets of life and death, that for which men are said to be wise indeed. The very root of wisdom is the freedom of the senses from error. It is the senses that yield to error and grief. One whose senses are subject to error can never be said to have attained wisdom. Samina's words were like a gentle breeze on a summer day, soothing and calming. As Narada listened, he began to understand the mysteries of life. He asked Samina, what is beneficial for one that is unconversant with the truths of the Scriptures, that is always in doubt, and that abstains from self-restraint, and the other practices having for their object The knowledge of the soul Samina smiled again. Bhishma replied, worshipping the preceptor, always waiting reverentially on those that are aged. And in the presence of Yudhishthira, the wise grandsire, Bhishma began to recount an ancient narrative. The story started with Sagar, a king who sought the counsel of Arishnamaya, a wise Brahmana of the Tarkshes race. Sagar was deeply troubled by his attachment to worldly objects and his fear of losing them. He asked Arishnamaya, what is that good by doing which one may enjoy felicity? Here how indeed may one avoid grief and agitation? Arishnamaya, wise and conversant with all the scriptures, looked at Sagara with compassion and said, the felicity of emancipation is true felicity in the world. A man of ignorance knows it not. Attached as he is to children and animals and possessed of wealth and corn, he